Okay, welcome. Here we are at another episode of Getting Real with Small Business. Today specifically with allied professional Beck, who is a pelvic physio. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to be here in your office, in your very new office.
Very new, it's very white. Sorry.
That's okay, all good. So tell me a little bit about how or why you chose to become a physio and specifically a pelvic physio.
Yeah, so I became a physio probably back in high school. I was dancing quite a lot and I actually got an injury and ended up as a patient at Sportsmed. And then my physio, who was lovely, she convinced me, instead of to be a ballet dancer, convinced me to go into physiotherapy, which was cool, and I love her for that.
Yeah.
After graduating, I got a job at Sportsmed as well, so I was kind of like a Sportsmed devotee. And then pretty quickly, like being one of the only minimal female staff, was seeing a lot of pregnant patients. And a lot of women's health kind of patients would come in and talk to me about their incontinence they were having. And in undergrad physio, you don't really learn, you learn a little bit about incontinence, that it exists, but we don't really learn how to treat it or what to do. So I was finding out ways to try and help these women and try and refer them on to experts in the field in Adelaide. And I was like, oh, I kind of want to do that. Like, I want to help those people too. And it works in really well with sports because there's a lot of people in sports who are incontinent or have pelvic conditions. And I just felt like I wanted further training in that. So I then went and did a couple of small courses, just dip my toes in the water and find out if I liked it, and ended up loving it. And then I ended up at Melbourne University to do my postgrad certificate in pelvic floor physio.
Cool.
So now I treat men's, women's, kids, elderly, you name it. If you have a pelvis, you can have an issue with it.
Very cool. Excellent. So how many years of study is that all up?
So I first actually went into a year of human movement at uni because I didn't get into physio first up. Then it was 4 years of physio and then 6 months of the postgrad, but then other courses as well along the way. So yeah, all up, just physio, probably 4.5 to 5 years.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very dedicated.
Yeah.
I did one
It's
year of uni and I was like, no, it's not for me.
No, I felt this like halfway through. I was like, oh, this is a slog, but it was kind of easy for me because I think I just really loved it. I think if you love something, you'll want to learn more.
Absolutely, that is definitely a key. So let's talk about the pelvis. Obviously, both men and women have a pelvis. But I guess you would see more issues in female than men, would you? Because of the whole postnatal thing? Yeah,
I think as typically my clientele, I see more women, just based of, I feel more kind of confident treating women. I've had a lot more training in treating women, but I do see men mostly with pelvic pain conditions. I don't do too much in the cancer world with men, so prostate cancer. But mostly to do with, the most people I see are predominantly women with either antenatal, postnatal, pelvic pain, incontinence, constipation, and then gynecological surgeries as well.
Cool. So how much, I guess, how much of your stuff, for want of a better word, crosses over to gynecology, I suppose? Yeah,
a fair bit. A lot of the time, in terms of what I treat in the pelvis, you've got like your bladder, uterus, and your bowel. And in the medical world, they're kind of split up with their specialties. So you've got with your bladder, you've got the urology world. With anything vaginal or uterus, you've got gynecology, and with anything bowel, you've got colorectal.
Of course.
So with a pelvic physio, you deal with all three areas, and it's quite a nice way, because often if you've got something wrong with bladder, something sometimes is wrong with either pelvic floor, and then if something's wrong with pelvic floor, something can be wrong with the bowel. So it kind of does cross over a fair bit, and working with, it's really important with the patients to work with their medical specialists as well to make sure they're getting good thorough care and that we're not missing anything.
Fair enough. Excellent. So you talked, I guess, a little bit about what's in the area already, but what about like the bone structure? I guess like me being a personal trainer, obviously a lot of the bone structure and muscle structure affects the way we can move. So can we talk a little bit about the different parts of the that area, I suppose?
Yeah, so I guess the pelvis, I forgot my model today, so sorry. But the pelvis is anything from belly button to kind of past pubic bone. So that involves like your whole pelvis as a whole, so your ASIS, your pelvic rim, and then also your hips as well. So people who have kind of groin issues, hip issues, and a lot of the time, and I think we're going to talk about it a bit later on, but with squatting position and how sometimes people's hips aren't in that optimal position to withstand a narrow squat or a wide squat, and they've got to find their suitable position depending on where the biomechanics are placed anatomically, and that varies from men to women, and even within there how their hips are formed, and there's often a consistent thing that we see in men often have that deeper hip socket, and women will have a more shallow hip socket, and that can affect their biomechanics as well in their squats. And then I guess your pelvic floor also then relates into that, where it connects all the way from your pubic bone through to your coccyx and then back around again, and not only helps with continence but really helps with that control as well. And I guess coming back to your squats and stuff like that, it won't really, from my point of view, doesn't really get revealed until you start to put a lot of load, and then you go, there's a bit of a weakness there. Maybe doing a body weight squat, you're not going to quite see it as much until the load starts to increase a little bit. So I guess we'll go into, what are the common issues that you see. I mean, we can touch on men, but particularly my interest is more in women and the postnatal side, and how then it relates to athletes who are postnatal and that kind of stuff. So what common things do you see? So I guess in female population, I will see athletes with either pelvic pain or incontinence is a big one, and what a lot of people don't realise is that a lot of athletes, depending on their chosen sport, whether you're a weekend warrior runner or professional tennis player, the statistics on incontinence are really, really high, especially in things like netball, CrossFit, gymnastics is another one. A lot of people love going to bounce and bouncing on the trampolines. Yes, I found out that was not a good idea after having 2 children. And it's so I think a lot of people will come to me sometimes and they'll say, I'm really fit, but I'm wetting myself, and why? But what they don't realise is that it's really, really common, but it's not normal, and it's something that can be assisted. And there's lots of reasons why people can be incontinent. It can be because you have a flexible bladder. It can be you don't have that control from your pelvic floor. It can be from even your breathing mechanics, and that's really what I look at as a pelvic floor physio, is to work out why they're experiencing that, whether it's urgency or from stress incontinence like cough, sneeze, laugh, jump. So that's probably my biggest field that I treat, and especially a lot of triathletes and long distance runners in that area as well. Then probably the other area that I treat is your postpartum, immediately postpartum, and unfortunately I think the care for postpartum women is done really poorly. So bad. Sorry mums. But it's something that we can hopefully spread the word on and educate people to do better. And there was actually, I think I might have talked to you about it, but there was some guidelines that came out last year on return to running, and they're not exactly scientific guidelines, but they're more from like experience of there was a pelvic floor physio involved, a running physio, and maybe some other strength and conditioning coaches as well, who came up with a 9-month to 12-month return to running plan for postpartum women, because a lot of people will go see their specialist or their GP and they'll say, okay, 6 weeks, I feel good, off you go, run, or go back to your training. And if you think about from like a healing point of view, if you're 6 weeks from a knee operation from your ACL, you're only just starting to really squat and lunge and those types of things, and you've got to think you've grown a baby in 9 months, you've potentially, whether you've had a cesarean or a vaginal delivery, you've had major abdominal surgery, or you've really stretched that tissue between your bladder and your vaginal wall. And that, we're thinking that tissue between your bladder and vaginal wall takes about 12 months to fully stiffen up again. And that's, I explain it that, if you've got that flexibility, that bladder's going to move a bit more and allow that kind of urine to escape when you go to do that high intensity activity. So you've got to give yourself time.
My personal experience with both my kids, I was still bodybuilding, and I wanted to quickly lose the weight after both babies, and I was strong, fit. You know, my mum was a midwife. I was very confident about pregnancy and labour, wanted natural births, and both, you know, were very, very good labours and had no issues. I didn't even tear, I mean, very minor tears, but no stitches or anything like that. So, you know, for me, it was just like, get back on the horse, let's do this. With Ivy, it took a little bit longer because I had a bit of weight, more weight to lose. I was a little bit self-conscious about going to the gym. But with Phoenix, I just want to, you know, this time I want to do better than last time. You know, I want to get back to the gym, you know, quicker than I did last time, and lose the weight quicker than what I did last time. And I guess there's a certain amount of expectation from...
I feel like there's that social media pressure as well.
Social media pressure, but, you know, I guess we like to talk about pressure from external pressure, but really it's your own internal pressure that is expecting... I think if you were to talk to all your friends and family, they would not really have that pressure on you, but you kind of assume that there's that pressure out there. And I guess from my point of view, you know, every time I'd bump into someone I hadn't seen for a while, they were, when are you competing next? It was always a question, you know, I guess it's a bit of a
that's part of your identity.
When are you competing next? Like, you know, so there sort of becomes that pressure within yourself. So 8 weeks I gave myself after having Phoenix. I was like, right, I want to just get back on the horse and get straight back into competing.
And I think there's room for that. Like, a lot of people come to me saying, you know, I want to get back, and the guidelines are that's exactly what they are. They're just guidelines to help. But for example, if you're training all the way through your pregnancy and you stay fit and you stay strong, and then you want to get back a bit,
by the way.
but then you want to get back a bit quicker, you probably can, versus like if you've been unwell during your pregnancy, you're not able to exercise, and there's reasons why you can't, or you just didn't, and that's fine too. Everyone's story is different, but if you haven't done that, you're almost starting from scratch with your fitness journey again, and you've really got to cut yourself some slack, and really just be realistic and say, okay, I've made a human.
Exactly.
And I'm caring for that, and you know, there's things like breastfeeding really changes your hormonal control as well, which can influence your bladder and healing times and that. And then there's also just that ability to be able to have the energy as well, because there's especially probably more so first-time mums don't necessarily know what to expect. But then even more so on second, because you've already got the other one.
Exactly. And then, you know, and every child is different. You know, they're just so different. So you might get lucky with your first baby and they sleep through, and the second one doesn't. So, or
feeding might be really easy first, and then next time it's horrible. And
it's very, very different. So I guess, you know, I just wanted to get back into it, and you know, I planned my competition, you know, and I was already, I guess, in preparation, had the date set, and all right, here we go. I kind of noticed that there was more abdominal separation with the second time. Like, I could fit probably 2 fingers, but again, it was, for me, it was like, I'll worry about that later. And turns out then it wasn't until I started to lean up coming into that competition and my abs started to show that I realised there was a little lump there. And one of my clients said, I think that's a hernia. And I was like, no, that's not. Because my partner had the other one. I can't pronounce that. But it was huge. And this was literally, it just looked like I had 2 belly buttons. And I was like, well, I'm not going to worry about it now because I'm in comp prep. I don't need this distraction right now. Worry about it later. And then, once I finished competing, you know, went to the GP, and sure enough, it was. And I guess I can only assume that because the abdominal separation was there through the training, it's popped out. And I was kind of worried, is it like a part of my organ or something like that? But the doctor or the surgeon said no, it was just actually literally a bit of fat. I was like, how could that possibly be fat? Because I was so lean, you know, I was like 8% body fat coming into
It's more that underlying tissue.
The internal fat that's not supposed to go away, that's supposed to stay there to protect your organs. So, you know, I guess suffered the consequences of not, you know, doing the right thing and doing all the boring, you know, rehab exercises, and that's the hard thing about it, because they are boring.
They are boring.
You know,
I tell people that, I'm like, they're boring, but you have to do them.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the hard part. And even with my partner, he's got, you know, an ongoing hamstring injury, and the, you know, the things that he has to do, it's the same thing. It's so boring, and once he doesn't feel the pain, he stops doing them. But then because he stops doing the exercises, he gets injured. It's like you have to keep doing them.
Maintaining, and if you start at that, like, with the boring exercises, so your plain pelvic floor contractions from, you know, day 1 postpartum, or day 2 if you can, then, you know, you start from that, you build up, and then it just becomes habit, and you try and then work them into your routine.
Yes,
so you, and
that's like a warm-up.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I try and tell my patients, is we want to make this easy for you, and part of your rehab should be working it into your lifestyle and what you're able to do and able to keep doing, so that it just becomes, if it's easy and it becomes a habit, then it's effortless.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess, like you were talking about the flaw in the system, I suppose, I was really disappointed to know that, you know, I wasn't told about a pelvic physio, and perhaps maybe if I went through the private system I might have been. I mean, talking to some clients, because the first thing I do when I sit with a new client is, you know, have you had kids? And have you seen a pelvic physio? Like, have you actually gone down that path? And I'm finding the ones that went through private, sort of, some of them did.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I find it's probably 50-50, and it often depends on the specialist, but I mean, I'm biased because I'm a pelvic floor physio, but I think everyone who is postpartum, like cesarean or vaginal delivery, should see a pelvic floor physio. And if there's lots of resources to find one. If you're not, if you don't know where they are, there's often the APA, Australian Physiotherapy website, has some details on who's registered through them, and they're often the way to find them in your local area. But also, I just feel like if you've had a really positive birth and a really positive pregnancy and you feel fine, a lot of the specialists or GPs will say, oh, I don't think you'll be fine, like, just go for it. But you've still, like anything, you've still gone through that process, you've still had changes in your biomechanics, you've still got goals that you want to reach, and to have that kind of, just even if it's sometimes, I've had some patients that come for a one-time check, they know that they're good, we make a plan, and they go ahead and do that, and they're happy to work with their PT with that, or by themselves. But just to have that direction saying, yes, I am confident, I am healthy, I can do this, or if there's something that's, you know, needs a little tweaking, then you're, at least you're aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't pointed in that direction. So, you know, when I do sit with clients or prospective clients, I'm always, you know, always head and send them in that direction to make sure that everything's okay, because just because you feel like it's okay, or just because your birth went really well, or your pregnancy went really well, like you said, it is so much change. And now that I think about it in hindsight, it's actually obvious. Like, you had, like, you know, my babies were around 4 kilos.
Plus extra blood, plus placenta.
All of that. And I put on a fair bit of weight, especially with my first. You know, that load, the extra load you're carrying. So what did I got up to like 96 kilos with my first. So I'm normally around the mid-70s. So that's a lot of extra weight just for structurally for your body to take. So and you know, I guess I was more focused on, well, my labour went fine. Because you're thinking about how much damage, I suppose, the baby coming through the canal, but then you don't actually think about the 9 months that you're carrying.
Exactly.
You know, and how that structurally changes.
And then how you're going to get back to where you wanted, like your goals, and like I said, whether it's the weekend warrior, or if it's just you do a home Pilates session, or you actually want to do your bodybuilding and get back into competitions. But to have that kind of ability to know where you're at, your baseline, and how to improve on that, and have ways to work with someone, that's really important. And it's just done, unfortunately, really, really poorly. And hopefully by getting the word out, it'll minimise that risk. Because I think, you know, if you can, as boring as the exercises are, if you can nip it in the bud, you know, you can stop further damage happening. The research is actually really good for things like stress incontinence, so where you cough, sneeze, laugh, jump, and you leak some urine, that physiotherapy is very, very effective for that. So the research is there, but we're just not telling people to go do it. I think it's that, you know, that she'll be right. Which is what it was with me. It's like, you know, it'll be fine, like everything's fine. And I think a lot of people make assumptions on, especially people who are fit, you know, they make an assumption, oh, you look fit. You must be well, you must be fine, you mustn't have anything wrong. And I don't think you can assume on anyone. And I've had patients that are postpartum, had no trauma, no tearing, easy birth, not too long, not too short, nothing wrong at all. But they go to start running, and then they feel something's not right. And there can still be other things that go on, even though you've had a really, really positive birthing experience. And that's not to scare anyone at all, but more just to educate, to say that just make sure there's no harm in getting a checkup. No harm.
No, absolutely. And I think it might have been on your Instagram page that you shared. It was an athlete. I think she had dreadlocks.
Oh,
she was the CrossFitter, and she took a photo of herself post workout, and she literally peed herself. Yeah, and it was good. It was giving it sort of not normality, because like I said, it's not normal, but it's not making it taboo.
Yeah,
you
talk
know,
about
because
it.
people, I mean, women, we're embarrassed about talking about weeing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is embarrassing, but it happens, and it's common. You know, so I think for someone like an athlete like her to come out and, you know, show that photo of her literally weeing herself. Yeah, look at me, I'm fit as a, like, I mean, she was staunch, right? She was very fit, CrossFitter, I think.
Yeah.
And the fact that it happened to her, I was like, wow, like it made me feel that's so brave of her to share that, and I thought it was great. It was a great post. So let's talk a little bit about the Q angle.
Yes.
Which is the difference between, I guess, men and women.
Just so for you guys who don't know what the Q angle is, it's where your hips are wider and so your knees come inwards a bit more, so almost like a knock-knee kind of approach. And we were talking earlier on about it's not probably necessarily an issue necessarily with the pelvis, but probably more down the chain, even with like knee injuries with training. So especially a hot topic in AFL women's at the moment is the increased rates of ACLs, and they think that it has to do, we're not 100% sure, but with more of that wider hips, narrower knees coming in with that Q angle, that can place some load on the knees and be more susceptible to having an ACL injury or some patellofemoral joint pain. So it's really important from a PT and a physio perspective to make sure you've got really strong glutes to be able to control the knees to go outwards and not come inwards. So you'll see people, you probably do it yourself with your clients, but working with bands to push out their knees on the bands while they're squatting, and just developing that control from the hips to then help down the chain. Because
it is such a common one, you know, so you can see that weakness straight away, and generally it is in females, and especially if they're a little bit smaller and they're not so, I guess, experienced in strength training, and they are on the weaker side. You see it straight away, even on the leg press, you know, and then it just sort of collapses inwards. So it's very, very interesting. And is that because of the shape of the pelvis itself, or is
it's more to do like just from a wider hip perspective, like wider pelvis perspective. So the wider your hips are, like your knees are still going to be in their same position. You can't walk out here. And I think probably the biggest thing with that is just making sure you can't change someone's pelvis.
No.
But to make sure they've got adequate control in their hips to be able to then control down the chain.
So strengthening the muscles around the area to control it better. Excellent.
And not necessarily like your big glute max, but you're like glute med, rotators, and all the little ones.
Yes, it does get complicated, doesn't it? Because you know, sometimes you think it's hamstring issue and it's actually something else. And I guess as a PT, and we're not physios, you know, we almost kind of expected to be able to know as much as a physio to be able, because you kind of do need to know that a lot about the body to be able to troubleshoot certain things.
Technique, and if someone is in pain, and that's like I actually had a girl come see me yesterday for hip pain, and she had a really deep hip socket, and it was causing a lot of pinching in her groin, and she was doing a lot of like narrow squats and like goblet squats, and we just changed her to a wider squat and no pain. And she's able to still train, she's able to still lift heavy, she'll be able to do all the things that she wants to do, but we just literally changed her position and she's fine.
And this, I guess, is a bit of a debate in the PT world, and certainly when I first came in as a newbie as a PT, you know, you'd be listening to certain mentors or reading certain posts on, you know, Instagram or Facebook, oh, that's not how you do a squat, or that's wrong, or this is wrong. And now, I guess, being in the industry for a while and having the right mentors now, knowing that there isn't one right way to do a squat, because not
Has
everybody.
To be individualised.
There's a preferred way, but
Yeah.
then it's like if your biomechanics just doesn't allow for that, then you need to allow the variation.
Yeah.
Whether it's a wider squat, and even with
Or like
deadlifts as
plates
well.
under ankles if you haven't got the ankle movement.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
do what works for you. Yeah.
Yes, so it sort of alleviated a lot of pressure off me, because I was like, oh, what if someone tells me that that's not the right way, or another PT judges me and says that's not how you do it, and then you realise that no, actually there isn't just one way, that you have to have variances, because we are just so different biomechanically, and then you've got injuries and stuff like that you need to work around as well. So it literally is a massive troubleshooting issue. So talking about training, I guess, so squats and deadlifts, what kind of issues do you see that really, I guess, hampers those two big lifts?
Yeah, so probably like we talked about before, like a lot of people's ankle restriction, will, like if they've had a previous ankle injury, will have that limited ability to be able to get into their squat. So being able to use a plate under your heels and just get that better range is probably a big factor that I see a lot of the time for more squats, as well as that difference in the hip socket. So typically what we see, and this is a very blanket kind of statement, it's not applicable to everyone, but most men will have a deeper hip socket. So you've got like your ball and socket joint that kind of sit like that. So men will have a lot deeper hip socket, and they'll sometimes be a bit more susceptible to an impingement type injury in their hip, which will favour, depending on where they sit, either a wider or narrower squat, and changing that position is fine. And women typically will have a shallower hip socket, so where it's not necessarily cupped over like that, but a bit more narrow, so they've got a lot more flexibility. So to be able to have good, strong glute control, they could probably, most of the time, do squats in any position they like, but what they might find is that they get some soreness after, because they haven't got that control to be able to control where that ball and socket joint's going. So that's where it's really important from like my physio perspective to have that control of not only your big muscles like your glute max, hammies, quads, but also your little glute med, your rotators, your core muscles, pelvic floor, to be able to then progress your squat level up.
And it's all tied in, isn't it?
And especially from a pelvic floor perspective, what I tend to find is that narrower squats are probably more favourable for someone who feels a bit vulnerable. If you feel like you've maybe got a prolapse or you've got urinary incontinence, you might prefer a narrow squat. But also what people are quite surprised to hear is that a lunge is actually sometimes more favourable, because when you're in a squat, all your weight's going straight through the centre, but when you're in a lunge, all your weight is over one leg, and then you actually get that support from that leg, and then your pelvic floor feels a lot more safe to be able to have that control. As much as lunges put more pressure on that one leg, it's good for your single leg control, but it's actually really favourable from a pelvic floor perspective as well.
There you go, I did not know that. There you go.
Fun fact.
I love I mean, obviously unilateral work is great, because your strength, especially if you've got one side that is weaker than the other, always include unilateral leg exercises in my leg workouts for sure. So that's good to know, an extra little bonus there. That's awesome.
And I think sometimes, like I've had patients that see a lot of PTs, and I think the biggest thing in the PT industry is just sometimes people like want to do a squat, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable saying, oh, that doesn't feel right in my pelvic floor, because it's such a taboo area.
It is.
And it's really, really important that a PT, and I know you do this, like you make your patient feel comfortable, client feel comfortable, that they can tell you anything, and even if they feel a bit awkward and you can sense that, say, okay, if you feel anything in your pelvic floor, just make it not taboo. Just say, if you feel uncomfortable in your pelvic floor, you might feel vulnerable, you might feel a bit heavy or anything like that, you let me know, and then they feel comfortable to say, oh yeah, that does feel a bit funny, because they might think that that's normal.
And I guess tying into that, obviously we have our cycle as well, so obviously I would assume that things are even more vulnerable at that point, because obviously things are swollen, expanded.
So just before we start our cycle, there's a huge shift in the hormones, which actually make our uterus will naturally drop a little bit. So things become a little bit more flexible, and often just before you start your menstrual cycle, people will say, I feel a bit heavier, or I can feel that, you know, vulnerability, or feel like I'm going to have a bit of a leakage on something. And that's where you really want to track your cycle, tell your PT or tell your coach or your friends that you're training with that time of the month that you might need to take a step back, do more lower impact, work on your breathing mechanisms, work on your pelvic floor, and then straight after your cycle it's the opposite. You might then want to train a bit harder. And really just listen to your body on that. And they're doing a lot more research with that now. We haven't got much research on it at the moment on like if we should tell people to do that, but to me it just makes sense.
Absolutely. I've been doing a little bit of reading on training with the cycle and stuff like that, and it's certainly interesting. And again, another thing, you know, like obviously disappointing that, you know, I wasn't pointed in the direction of a pelvic physio after I had my babies, but also it's disappointing how little I knew about my own cycle. We don't learn about that at school or anything like that. You know, it's pretty disappointing. I really only started to research my cycle when I was trying to have my second child. Because my first child, bless her, was a lovely surprise. We did need to try for her. But with my second, we were actually trying. So then it was like, okay, well, what do I need to know? And you know, I would have been in my 30s. And it's disappointing to know that I didn't, you know, like we should know that. You know, we should know that. And then when it comes to training again, we really need to take that into consideration. You know, men and women are not the same, you know, and I think sometimes we try to be, but we're just not. It's not like we're not as good as men, it's just we're different. We are completely different beings, biomechanically, hormonally.
And even woman to woman, completely different as well.
Of course.
So individualization is really, really important for what someone feels through their menstrual cycle when they're training. If they feel really fatigued and low mood and all that kind of stuff, they need to listen to that. But someone else might feel really energized, and that's when they can train their best. And it's really varying on the person.
I certainly definitely find it's more 2 days before my mood is like the world is ending.
Grab the chocolate and lollies.
I'm not getting out of bed today. Fun times. So what are, obviously, you know, it's a little bit hard because we're not talking about a specific case study, but in terms of what are some really good general exercises that we could do to help, again, probably more talking about women, I suppose, that would really help lay some foundations for obviously your squats and getting into that heavy stuff.
So I think to start with, pelvic floor control, I think for women is really important. I think we really undervalue that, but then there's also the younger generation. I think we talked about this a bit, that you have to also relax your pelvic floor as well. So when people do a pelvic floor contraction, we generally want people to like squeeze and lift around their rectum like they're holding onto wind. And if you can't do that, it's fine. Just you might want to get it assessed. Sometimes it's not because you can't do it, it's because you're already up there. So you want to really let that relaxation happen first. So really feel like you let your bum cheeks go soft, you let your rectum go soft, letting everything really relax. And the way I explain it to people is, with a pelvic floor contraction, it's really no different than a bicep curl. You can't do bicep curls here. You're not going to get much benefit. You need to go down and then all the way up to that full muscle contraction load. And that's probably the same with pelvic floor. And then generally, like, I think just keeping strong in general, like my biggest saying is, you know, the stronger it is, the harder it is for it to break. So if you can keep strong, as well as keeping, you know, you want to have that flexibility as well. But we know that strength is really probably your primary focus that you need, because you can develop your flexibility as you get stronger through eccentric loading. So I'd say your basic, obviously you've got your basic functional movements, squat, deadlift, lunge, push-pull movements. But I'd also say in terms of like your little muscles, like little clams, bridges, like things that you can do that really you can do in front of Netflix.
That's what we want.
I love that. Lazy exercise is my favourite. So bridges, which is where you're lying on your back and lifting your bum up. Clams are great, really easy to do. So when you're lying on your side, knees bent, and lift the knee up. And then even just some basic abdominal dead bug type things as well. Yeah, they're quite hard work, and people, when they're done correctly, they are hard. They look easy, but they're hard.
That's right. And I think I've had this happen with clients before, because a lot of the time people, I guess, that they'll see stuff on the internet, they'll do it, but you know, unfortunately you don't have anyone to cue you in that instant. And I watch a lot of people in the gym do those kind of, you know, easy exercises, and okay, you know, actually I really struggle with that when I do it properly. But then because they're not actually engaging properly. Or they're doing it too quickly, like the dead bug is, you know, just going up and down and not actually engaging.
And
so
even basic cable work, like extensions, abductions.
It's all about
like getting that like mind to focus on it, not just going through the motions, really making sure you switch everything on. You've got that control there, and that's why it's really good to have that kind of individualized program, supervision. And sometimes people will come to me and like we'll go, and you probably have this as well, you go through a basic squat and you say, you know, push through your heels a bit more, and they'll be like, oh yeah, there's my glutes. Okay, now I found them. And
people can do that for years. People can train for years, and then they finally get a PT, and it's sad, because then you kind of see the sadness in their face. They go, I've been doing this for years and I've been doing it wrong. And it's like, well, it's okay, you're here now. But you know, that muscle-mind connection is so important. And I always say, you know, the first most important thing with any movement is knowing what you're working. Because how do you know where you should be feeling it if you don't know? So if you're working, like if you say if you're doing a bicep, then we need to know this is a bicep curl, and that's where you need to feel it. But there's been so many times where I've done, you know, say flies, which is a chest exercise, and you know, the person has gone, oh, this is a great arm exercise, and I'm just like,
Education is key.
A little bit of the arm there, but we're mainly trying to work the chest. You know, and because people literally just watch other people and go, oh, that's how you do it, and they literally are going through the motion, and they're not engaging what they're supposed to be engaging. So that a lot of that happens. I think once people do things properly, even the simplest things, they'll go, oh wow, that's actually really hard. Once you start to engage, you get the breathing technique correct as well, and you're not just, and a lot of the time those really slow movements like your bird dog, people just do so quickly, and they're just going with momentum. It's like, no, that's not.
It's harder if you slow it down.
Yes.
And I think you made a good point there about breathing as well. I think I forgot to mention that with your pelvic floor, you've really got to coordinate that breathing, and if you hold your breath, something's got to go down. So you really want to use breathing to your advantage, breathing out on your efforts, and making sure that that's going to give you a passive lift of your pelvic floor naturally anyway. So I think, those are probably my basics: breathing, pelvic floor, some basic little Pilates style exercises of your like little glutes and your little abdominal muscles, and then progressing into your basic functionals, and then you can go guns from there.
And then it gives you that good foundation, because you can jump into your squats and stuff like that, and you're going to be fine when you're doing body weight, and maybe you add a bit of load and you're still fine, but then the problem is that chain of weakness will start to show when you start to load really heavy. But I guess going back to the pelvic floor, when I first came to see you for my first consult, I was doing pelvic floor way wrong. Like you said before, like just overbearing too much. It was more like I was squeezing
tummy
and I was like, and you're like, you're not doing your pelvic floor. I'm like, okay. So, you know.
And I think it's hard. You can see your bicep, you can see your quads.
That's right.
You can't see your pelvic floor, and that's probably that's why having that assessment is invaluable, I think. And you probably would agree that a lot of people would do it wrong.
It's so much more subtle than what you think it is.
You don't get the burn.
It's like, oh, is that it? Oh, okay, cool. But once you know, then
and to switch it off when you're having your cup of tea and not doing much.
Because you were saying on that consult, you were saying that a lot of women do overdo it.
Or like they'll do too much, and it's strongly like in terms of that can present as like pelvic pain or urgency with what I see, and that can often be associated, and I'm guilty for this, like your jaw clenches or your kind of type A personality that will be a bit more like this. We know that jaw and shoulders are strongly related to this tension in your pelvic floor, so if you feel like you're struggling to let it go, even just like let everything go.
I know, with my jaw I usually end up going like let it go, oh my god. And especially I guess during COVID, I remember the first few weeks of COVID, I've never felt so much jaw pain in my whole life, because that first 3 weeks, because because you're constantly adapting your business, and you know, just the stress of knowing that the next day something could change. And yeah, I never actually felt, I mean, I'm a pretty stressy person because I like type A, like I'm used to stress, you know, it's fine, but that I've never experienced that before, and I literally had to do like jaw exercises or relaxing it was just crazy. Cool. So we might do a couple of exercises. We'll film a couple of exercises and we can tack it on to the end of this video. So thank you so much.
That's all right.
It's been really awesome, and yeah, I learned a little bit, not a little bit, a lot, but it was good to be able to integrate with what I do and what you do, so that's really awesome. So thank you for coming coming to see you, letting me come to see you.
Thank you for coming to see me.
In this beautiful new office of yours. And yeah, let's do these exercises and we'll show them to everyone at the end.
Cool, thanks guys.
Thanks.
So we're going to do a squat, and what we've got today is we've got the band on the knees, so that way we're going to push the knees out to use the little muscles in the hips, so we're not going to go into that knock-knee position. So we're going to go toes slightly facing outwards. Good. And what we're going to do is you're going to sit your bum back down, so that way instead of bending your knees forwards, you're going to sit your bum back down and keep your knees pushing out against the band.
Okay.
Beautiful. Good. And keeping that width through there. Good. And up you come. Push through your heels and up you come. Good. Good. And again. Lovely. And push through the heels, and that will activate the glutes a bit more. Yeah.
All right. We might do it
on
sideways as well. Yep. So
perfect.
Everyone can see.
So folding at the hips, sit the bum back down. Okay. Perfect technique.
I should hope so.
Perfect. And then pushing through the heels. Great work. Good. So we go into a bridge. We're going to use the band again around the knees, and what we're going to do is you're going to keep the knees out over your hips and feet hip width apart as well. Push the knees against the band a little bit. Roll through the spine, so tuck your tummy in. Good. Push through your heels and lift your bottom off the ground. Good. And then you want to do the opposite on the way back down, so rolling through the spine. Beautiful. If you want to control your breath as well, what you can do is as you go up, you breathe out, and as you come back down, you breathe in. Breathing out, roll through the spine, little squeeze of your pelvic floor, and then rolling back down, one vertebrae at a time, breathing in. Fabulous.
Beautiful.
Perfect. Go into dead bug. I reckon what we've got to do here is if you take your feet down first. Beautiful. So in dead bug, you want to draw your tummy muscles on, but you don't want to suck your tummy in. You almost just want to feel like you're drawing in at your belly button or doing tight jeans up. Okay. So just draw in gently. Lift one knee up towards your chest. Good. And then match the other one at tabletop, keeping this drawn in. Good. You can pop your arms up above to the ceiling. Beautiful. And then opposite arm to leg comes back, keeping that abdominal muscle drawn in, and then up you come. Good. You're working hard. Good. And then the other one, breathing out. Good. And back in. Good. And if you don't want it to be as hard, you just go a little bit shorter. So if we go halfway, another leg, that's it. Good. Beautiful. Just to there, and then draw back in. Good. Draw tummy to spine. Good. And then other arm. Beautiful. And that's a really hard exercise, sometimes a bit too hard for the first postpartum, but a really nice advanced exercise if you're feeling you want that challenge without doing sit-ups and that extra load. It's a really nice control exercise.
Okay.
All right. So clams are really good, especially even early postpartum. They're really easy to do, and they're really a lazy exercise to do in front of the TV, and you still get a good little butt burn with them, which is nice. You can always pop a pillow underneath your head, or you can lean on your arm, and you want your hips in line with your ankles and your knee at kind of a 90-degree angle, but you can vary that depending on how you feel. You want the hips to stay on top of each other and ankles to stay together. and you use your hip to do the movement. So rather than just lifting your knee up, you want to feel like your hip rotates up, pushes against the band, good, and then rotates back down. And you really want to make sure that the hips stay forward and not rocking backwards.
Yep.
That's it. You do a really good job. Perfect. And really isolating at the glute.
Yeah, so you almost, it feels like you're
That's doing all the work.
squeezing something between your butt cheeks.
Perfect. And back down. Good.
So you're not really going as wide as what you would
No,
think.
it's not a big movement. It's really little, and it would depend on where your hip socket is and what the shape is. Some, like I get barely any movement because I haven't got a good movement in my hip socket. But some people get a really big movement depending on their flexibility.
Cool.
And if you wanted a different way of doing it as well, the other way you can do it is if you pop it around your ankles and you do what we call a reverse clam.
Okay.
So you keep the knees and hips together, and then you bring ankle up. Good. The same thing. You want the hips and knees not to move.
I can feel that on the other side.
Oh, can you? Like a stabilization?
Yeah.
Yeah. You still feel like you should still feel like your little hip on this side working, but you might get a bit of stabilization, and then back down. Good. Try again. Up you go. Good. And same thing. It won't move far, but you should be able to isolate that control in the hip too. And that'll work the opposite. So the clam works your external rotators, and then a reverse clam is internal rotators.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's do one more. I've not done these before.
Yeah.
Looks super awkward.
It is awkward. There's no way around that. I'm not just making you look silly though.
Excellent. Beautiful. That was good. That was a new one.
Cool. I thought I might as well just add that in while we're